Sport for Australians is a national pastime, practiced with an almost religious fervour. There is much varied opinion as to the merits of sport on society. There are those who see highly competitive sport as a substitute for war, citing that much of the activity taking place on the sporting fields resemble more the activity suited to battlefields. The intense rivalry that has developed over the years between states and other nations would seem to support this claim. Certainly, in the case of Australians, our passion for sport has intensified to such a degree that much of our national identity and pride can be directly attributed to our sporting achievements. Sport has become an integral feature of our culture. For the Christian community to stay in touch with the average Australian, it is imperative that it comes to terms with this aspect of our culture. From earliest times in the colonies, church school programs utilised sport. By the early 1900s, the various traditions of the Christian church were developing their own understanding of sports activities and how best to put sports to use. For some in the Christian churches, sports were a social function. For others, it was an illustration of all men's equality in the new world, demonstrating that achievement and not birth determined a person's true worth. For others still in the Puritan tradition, sport was of Satan's realm. After the Second World War, many influences in Australian society were due to the American impact. As American sportsmen with Christian commitment expressed their faith, Christians in Australia recognised the potential sport exhibited. It was said in America during the 50s, "When an athlete speaks, young America listens," and so it is today. In American culture, evangelical Christian belief was their heritage. Many professional sportsmen were Christians. Australians, however, had no such heritage and far fewer Christians in top sport. Those who were often pressured by other Christians either to be ridiculous martyrs or, to the other extreme, to turn away from such activities where temptation was seen to be too great even for the strongest. The few struggled to come to terms with their Christian commitment and the enormous talents they had been given. Some Christian traditions saw no dilemma at all and continued to encourage their talented sportsmen and women, even providing them with times of worship other than on a Sunday. Meanwhile, small numbers of evangelical Christians in various cities who were in top sport began meeting for mutual encouragement. Brian Booth, for instance, the former Australian Test cricket captain during the 60s, established the Sydney-based Christian Sports Fellowship. Local churches began to develop sports programs with tennis, hockey, netball, basketball teams and the like. In the 70s, a group of basketballers in Adelaide got together and founded Venture for Victory and took a touring team as a mission adventure to the Philippines. This became a regular part of their ministry, while other groups began to do likewise. Though many expressions of Christians' involvement in sport had emerged, there was no organised effort to minister to professional sportsmen and women, as there had been, for instance, in North America. One individual quick to recognise the need for such a ministry was hockey writer and recognised hockey player and triple jumper, Dr. Mark Tronson. Mark, an ordained Baptist minister and industrial chaplain since 1981, with the Interchurch Trade and Industry Mission, attended the Second World Congress on Sports Ministry in Hong Kong in 1982, with the purpose of ascertaining how Australian professional sports might be served by chaplains. Dr. Mark Tronson speaks of that experience.
That Congress in Hong Kong was the catalyst of which the Lord used in my life to instill that vision, that dream, that passion to see our own Australian sportsmen and women won for Jesus Christ. Senior clergy gathered around me, a support group, and gave me every encouragement. For the following 18 months, we then went and saw the heads of churches and shared this passion, this great vision. We thought through the issues and we set as our first target group a chaplaincy ministry to our professional sport right throughout the nation.
There were a number of dedicated people involved in this very significant period. One key individual was the Reverend Ken McDowell.
My work has been with the Interchurch Trade and Industry Mission, which is an ecumenical industrial mission. And we had some links with the beginnings of sport and leisure ministry, mainly because Mark Tronson worked with us. But he was onto something new. Out of his interest in sport, he saw another avenue of human activity, a bit like industry, with people from all walks of life taking an interest in this activity. And so he was onto pioneering a new ministry into a new sector of human life. Initially, we sat down and talked about this, and Mark went off to Hong Kong to a conference there, an international conference. And we had to try and think through what it meant to offer a ministry in a new area of human activity. And we recognised that it ought to be ecumenical, or to take in the heads of the churches, and he and I actually went round to see some of the heads of some of the churches in order to get their goodwill, to have their involvement really, and the involvement of their people in this mission to people in their sporting life.
With a sense of calling on their lives and assured of the support base from within their own denomination, as well as heads of churches, Mark and his wife Delma founded the Sports and Leisure Ministry in February 1984. Establishing a monthly newsletter to gain a financial base for the venture and making approaches to every major Australian professional sport were Mark's initial priorities. By November of that same year, the first appointment of a chaplain to a professional sport was made. Inaugural chairman, the Reverend Roger Reid, speaks of that appointment.
Ken Manley and Mark and I went out to see Fred Bennett, who was then the chairman of the Australian Cricket Board, and we discussed with him how a chaplain might operate and what value a chaplain might be to the Australian cricket team. And shortly afterwards, Mark was recognised as that chaplain.